I'm a fool about a lot of things, but one thing I'm not a fool about anymore is investing my hard-earned cash. I've been lucky enough to save a couple of bucks over the years working as a writer and producer. And in 2008, when the Great Recession knocked most of us on our asses, I saw a good number of those bucks go poof, bye-bye, nearly overnight. Blame bad policies, blame the housing bubble, blame credit default swaps, sure. I blame my idiot decision to invest in risky assets. Since then, I've been an index fund kind of guy. But once, just once, since the aughts, I broke my own rule and invested in a tech startup. A friend of a friend who I met at one of our self-congratulating Hollywood cocktail receptions caught me 3 gins in and told me about his disruptive new company that was going to change the world, one investment round at a time. I don't know if it was his earnest speech, his dimpled smile, or his youthful energy that got me, but I caved, and by the end of the month, I owned 0.05% of a Y Combinator-backed San Francisco-based seed stage venture that I barely understood, all because I ran into that guy at a party. The next time I ran into that guy was on the street. I was in San Francisco, where I was visiting for a talk at a creative arts high school. I took an early morning walk and passed by a filthy, crumpled body leaning head bent against a pharmacy storefront on Mission Street. The dimpled smile was gone. So was the youthful energy, tolerable body odor, and probably a third of his body weight. I only recognized him because of the tech company standard branded vest. It was stained with oil and dirt and God knows what else, but through it all, I could still see the unmistakable logo. A puffy pink cloud, a modern logo, a sleek logo, a Silicon Valley logo. I bent down so I could get a better look at his face. There the dimple was, underneath a big, jagged scab. "Eric?" I asked. He lifted his salivated chin slowly until our eyes met, but he looked right past me, as if some pursuer stood beyond, and I was simply blocking the view. I asked him if he wanted help. I put my hand out to pick him up off the ground. He took it and pulled me down to him. I sat down next to Eric, a guy who once looked like he was made of gold. He couldn't be older than 25, but now he looked like someone who bore the weight of 100 lifetimes. I asked Eric what he'd been up to in the years since we'd first met. He sat up, showed recognition, and told me a story. All the while staring, unblinking, at something he called the pink haze. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 57, The Pink Haze. The SUV hummed over a sandy desert highway, heading east into the Mojave Desert. Here, cactus and shrubs were scattered about, sidewinders and scorpions roamed, and tans and browns swallowed the bright colors of California cities. They planned the trip months ago. It wasn't a vacation, it wasn't work. It was something greater. Bonding time, yes, but greater than that still. They were going to the middle of the desert to become one, and to become elevated. Elevate. Unite. That's what the podcast said. Elevate. Unite. That's how you grow a startup from 3 friends with an idea to a billion-dollar unicorn that changes the way people live. But they weren't a unicorn yet. So, the road trip, with the emphasis on trip. Like 1,000 founders before them, they were heading into the desert to expand their minds with hallucinogens. Step 1, ayahuasca. Step 2, profit. In the driver's seat was Sonam. Though the car was so modern, she barely had to pay attention. Just touched the steering wheel every few minutes to let the AI know she was awake. Sonam was the CFO of their venture, graduated with honors from MIT, didn't take anything from anyone, but handed it out like it was Halloween candy. Max sat beside her in the passenger seat. He was the technical guy and had the thick glasses and all-day sweatpants to match. He could code his way out of anything, and his low EQ score often made it necessary for him to do so. Sonam turned to Max and told him to pass the bag of Doritos at his feet. He didn't answer, absorbed in an endless stream of Python on his souped-up $8,000 laptop. "Hey, Devlord, I said give me those Doritos!" Max passed the bag without acknowledging the insult. "Sure glad I have you in the passenger seat," Sonam said. "Really helps pass the time." She turned up the volume on the podcast they'd been listening to for much of the 8-hour drive.
Imagine a rock. It's the size of your hand, sitting in a mountain stream with barely a trickle of water, where few people ever visit. After 10,000 years, that trickle, no more than a leaking faucet, has transformed the rock to a grain of sand.
The car has gone silent. The host of the podcast, Javier Clem, is their North Star. Founder, entrepreneur, powerlifter, disruptor, mediator, philanthropist, billionaire. His words are sacrosanct. The last passenger, Eric, lifts his head from his phone to listen carefully. Eric, with a seductive dimple, is the CEO of the company. This was his idea, both the startup and the trip. The entire leadership team of Pink Cloud was heading to the fanciest ayahuasca healing center in the United States. Eric had done all the research and pulled some strings with a VP at Facebook to book their much-coveted spots. The center was known for its top-of-the-line trained indigenous spiritualist, guaranteed facilitated out-of-body experiences, the certified organic biomorphic architecture, and supremely fast Wi-Fi. Javier Clem continued.
People call me a founder. I don't think they know what the word means. I didn't find myself by starting a company. I didn't find myself by becoming famous. I didn't find myself by dropping a $4 billion IPO. I found myself by exiting society, meeting a shaman, and unlocking a part of my brain that I didn't know existed.
Eric leaned forward and paused the recording. "That will be us," he said. Sonam and Max nodded in the front of the car, and as the sun fell over the desolate and unforgiving land, they drove deeper into the Mojave. Here's the thing about tech founders. Great with tech, but take just one piece of that tech away, and they panic. Remember when I said Sonam barely needed to pay attention to drive her EV? Maybe she should have. They were lost. They should have been at the healing center 2 hours ago, but they'd seen no sign of it. And now they were in a GPS desert, and in a literal desert. Sonam was paying attention now, but all she saw were dusty side roads and shrub. The night was so dark, her headlights didn't seem to reach more than 15 feet ahead, so she crawled at 25 miles per hour. Eric sat in the back trying to get a signal on his phone to update the map. "Anything?" Sonam asked. Eric didn't even bother to answer. 0 bars. Max swore he saw a coyote 30 minutes ago. That was the last sign of life they'd seen. Max wasn't even looking at his laptop, which meant things were dire. At least the car had plenty of power. Sonam thanked the gods she'd gotten that $15,000 battery upgrade for the resale value. Max came out and said it. "We should just go home, call it a day." That woke Eric up. "Max," he said, "what is Pink Cloud to you?" Max, ever logical, replied the only way he knew. "Our startup." Eric shook his head in the back seat. "Have you even been listening to Javier? If it's just a business, just income to you, then you shouldn't be here." Max just stayed silent. Sonam cut in. "None of us should be here. We don't even know where here is. Not to mention that the ayahuasca ceremony began an hour ago. Even if we found the healing center, we'd miss the whole reason we came." Eric sat back, not sure how to reply. And just then, he saw a sign. "Stop! Stop the car!" And Sonam hit the brakes. It was a literal sign. The post was hanging at a 45-degree angle, and the sign looked like it faced 50 years of wind damage. But the words were clear enough. Herald City, 6 miles. They didn't have any other options, so they followed the road in the sign's direction. On the way, they passed a long closed gas station and a diner with an open sign that hadn't been opened in their lifetimes. 2 vultures stood sentry in the empty sill of an old glass window. There wasn't much to speak of in Herald City. A few rickety buildings, a brick one that may have been a bank at one point. Nothing looked open, but a couple streetlights were somehow still flickering. They got out of the car in what appeared to be the center of town, looked for anything or anyone that could direct them to the healing center. "Hello," Eric shouted. His voice echoed off the desert-eaten town. A new sound broke through the silence. The squeaky wheels of an old shopping cart being pushed by an even older woman. She had long gray hair and thick weathered skin. Her shopping cart had been converted to a peddler's wagon. Plastic-wrapped candles for a penny apiece. Playing cards for a dime. A dozen tonics covering all that ails you. Mechanical trinkets, amulets, and exotic items from faraway lands. She even had a small cage holding a one-eyed songbird. The 3 young founders all stood mouth agape at the sight of her, like she'd come not from down the street of this dying town, but from another time. "Tonic for your baldness?" she asked in a voice nearly as squeaky as her cart. She was looking at Max, who put a hand to his head of thick hair. "Balm for your female complaints?" she asked Sonam, who scoffed. "Carbolic soap for hygiene and rancorous odor?" she asked Eric, who surreptitiously sniffed. Sonam waved off the old lady's offerings and told her they were looking for the Ayahuasca Healing Center, asked if she knew where it was. "Ah, spiritual medicine. Medicine that opens the brain, mystifies, intensifies, heals, alters the psyche. You seek deep insight and ritual hallucination. Yes, I have this." She bent over and pushed aside tins of animal specimens, dried herbs, and pinned insects. "Here, this is what you seek. The locals are long gone, run off a century ago. But for hundreds of years, they used this for those purposes. Look, take it." She held in front of them a baby food-sized jar sealed with a fully rusted lid. Inside was a murky brown liquid. "It's yours, $3 only." "What is it?" Eric asked. "What you seek. Take it, $3 first." The 3 of them looked at each other and smirked. "Anybody have cash?" Eric asked. Nobody did. "Do you do Venmo?" said Max. The old lady shoved the jar into Eric's hand. "Just take it. It's yours. Pay me next time." She pushed her cart away from them. As she did so, Eric had a vague feeling that she walked in an inhuman manner. In any case, she slowly returned to the night she came from, and moments later, Herald City was again dead quiet.
Calling all sellers. Salesforce is hiring account executives to join us on the cutting edge of technology. Here, innovation isn't a buzzword. It's a way of life. You'll be solving customer challenges faster with agents, winning with purpose, and showing the world what AI was meant to be. Let's create the agent-first future together. Head to salesforce.com/careers to learn more.
Breaking news happens anywhere, anytime.
Police have warned the protesters repeatedly, get back.
CBC News brings the story to you live.
Hundreds of wildfires are burning.
Be the first to know what's going on and what that means for you and for Canada.
The situation has changed very quickly.
Helping make sense of the world when it matters most. Stay in the know. Download the free CBC News app or visit cbcnews.ca.
They followed more dark desert roads but found no sign of a bigger town or even an open gas station or motel. Just after 1 a.m., they pulled over in front of an abandoned roadside shop with a Coca-Cola sign in the cracked window. The idea was to save the remaining power in the car and wait until the sun rose to head out on the road again. They had plenty of privacy, Nobody had frequented this particular shop since the 1960s. Eric gathered wood from a pile of rubble and Max found dry brush and a newspaper and they made a fire. Eric, the CEO, held the jar in his hands. The fire illuminated the brown liquid within. There were some sort of seeds at the bottom, and it teemed with floating imperfections. Everyone goes to a healing center for their ayahuasca experiences, Eric said. It's so cliche. You don't need some paid pseudo shaman to open your mind. What does Javier say? Elevate, unite, said Sonam. What else do we need? We're all here. We've got heat. We've got snacks and bottled water. This is how it's supposed to be, not some posh retreat where they serve organic salads and offer massages. Outside in the desert, nobody around, just a fire and the executive team. That's a real experience. He held up the jar for the others to see. We don't even know what it is, Sonam said. It does resemble ayahuasca tea based on what I read on Reddit before we left, said Max matter-of-factly. Not knowing what it is, said Eric, is exactly why we should try it. Nobody can replicate what we're going to experience. Not those douches from Meta or those dipshits from OpenAI. We'll have something they can never have, an authentic, spiritual company retreat. You can't get that paying $5,500 a night, but you can get it here. He opened the jar and took a swig, then handed it to Max, who did the same, and Sonam, who hesitated before finishing it off. They passed the Doritos around to get rid of the horrid taste of the tea. Max said it reminded him of drinking a puddle. Eric wondered aloud why Max held such a frame of reference. They went quiet. The wind blew and the fire crackled. Eric poked at it with a piece of metal rail. The fire smoked, but not the typical gray or white. It was very clearly pink. And unlike typical fire smoke, it did not dissipate as it rose. A cloud formed above the fire and swelled as the fire produced more pink smoke. Eric looked up and saw that he and his colleagues were all enveloped in pink haze. It was now their world. Eric looked down into the coals and saw entire cities within them, societies of advanced creatures. He couldn't be certain that they were human, were born, lived, and died at each flicker of the coals. He was certain of this. He felt a great awe and wonder and a tremendous sorrow for these found and lost civilizations. He stared deeper into the flames and realized that fire resembled ocean waves. He yearned to ride them. It had long been a dream of his to move to some remote beach shack and make surfing his passion. Even now, he knew he'd never do it. He wasn't brave enough to leave a modern life. He was dependent on almond milk and streaming services, Wi-Fi, and smartwatches. An alien creature would sooner mistake him for the devices he lived by than the wild creatures from which he descended. He was built for smooth floors and closed windows, and any distance from them would destroy him. Never had he admitted this absolute truth, and it lay atop him as heavy as a Mack truck. Now the pink haze was so thick that Eric could not see he hesitated to call them his friends. He could not see Max or Sonam, his colleagues. He could not see the car he'd ridden to get here. Could not even see here. He saw only pink, felt only what the haze made him feel. He breathed in the smoke, filled his lungs with his greatest fears and ultimate comforts. He experienced the excruciating, slow breaking of each of his fingers with no possible defense. Crack, crack, crack. Simultaneously, he was a toddler climbing into his mother's arms. He placed his cheeks against her soft robe, and she stroked his hair and hummed a soothing tune. The pink haze regenerated like a cut starfish. Every moment that Eric had ever lived, kicking ocean waves with his brother, eating an orange slice at a baseball picnic, making out with Heather in the 9th grade, getting that first round of funding, that time on the subway he locked eyes with a stranger. The haze also brought Eric to moments that he hadn't lived. He was certain he'd never ridden a horse, or hit a forehand like Federer, or been struck by a jeep while retrieving a ball. But here, in the pink haze, it was all the same. It was terrible. And it was glorious.
With TD Direct Investing, new and existing clients could get 1% cash back.
Great! That's 1% closer to being part of the 1%.
Maybe, but definitely 100% closer to getting 1% cash back with TD Direct Investing. Conditions apply. Offer ends January 31st, 2025. Visit td.com/DI offer to learn more.
Some mysteries can be solved by looking at the facts.
But sometimes the truth behind unexplained events and bizarre experiences lies somewhere in the unknown. I'm Rasha Pecoraro.
And I'm Yvette Gentile. And each week on our podcast, So Supernatural, we partner with the one and only Ashley Flowers, host of the #1 true crime podcast, Crime Junkie, to investigate some of the strangest occurrences our world has ever seen.
From ghosts to aliens to conspiracy theories and everything in between, we unravel the possible explanations behind all types of unsolved mysteries, no matter how hard they may be to believe.
Join us every Friday for new episodes and hear the many stories already waiting for you today.
Listen to So Supernatural now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
The drive back to San Francisco was mostly silent. It hadn't taken long to find a signal, and once they did, the car did most of the driving. Nobody was eager to share the cruel and magnificent details of their nights. All agreed on two things. First, whatever the shopping cart lady in Herald City had given them was not ayahuasca. Second, they'd all seen the pink haze. Not vaguely, not in a mass hysteria way. They each saw it, breathed it, and felt it. They returned to the office that week, held meetings, emceed conference calls, progress charts were drawn up, pitch decks sharpened, investor presentations rehearsed, value propositions touted, terms negotiated, financial projections declared, customer bases targeted. As he ran the company over the following days, Eric would occasionally think back to the desert fire, but he didn't dwell on it. Javier Clem, the great podcast guru, said it didn't pay to do so. Eric found himself avoiding Max and Sonam, didn't schedule one-on-ones with either of them. He wasn't sure why, only a vague feeling that it was healthier not to, like eating a cucumber instead of a Butterfinger. But they shared a 3,000 square foot office and co-led a company. So one day they were together with a group of big-time angel investors in the conference room, the kind of people who could make or break startups, send them into the stratosphere, or crumple them like tin foil. Eric led the pitch and spoke at great length about performance indicators of scaling product-driven user acquisition rates. Afterwards, he asked if anyone had comments. One of the potential investors, a muscular guy with a horrific goatee, spoke up about horizontal integration. As he listened, Eric stood by the window to take in the view of Telegraph Hill. Above the multi-million-dollar apartments lining the hill were trees, and above the trees was a 210-foot concrete tower. Eric had never been inside it, and its reason for being was a mystery to him. The sky was clear, but smoke was emanating from the tower. Eric looked closer and realized the smoke was not white. It was pink. A thick pink cloud formed and filled the sky. He looked over at the goateed investor still regurgitating his thoughts. He didn't seem to notice. Neither did any of the other investors. Sonam and Max, however, were focused solely on the window, through which Eric could now see only the pink haze. "Eric?" someone said. It was the goatee guy. "Eric, can you share numbers on the total addressable market?" The pink haze was now seeping through the air conditioning ducts. "What about runway? Performance indicators? Burn rate?" Goatee continued. "GMV, CAC, CLV, MRR, KPI, Eric? The man's questions faded away as the pink haze ate up all sound, all sight, until quickly the haze had filled the entire room, and Eric was inside the haze, just like he'd been that night in front of the fire. Eric was now reliving his life's most devastating disappointments. When he lied to his mom in middle school and refused to admit it. When his pig Stuffy went missing on a family trip to Chicago. When a professor told him his argument was juvenile in front of the whole class. At the same time, he He was in the woods of his hometown playing explorers with his two best childhood friends, getting the big phone call about their first round of seed funding, smoking pot on his back porch with his biggest crush, and tasting an Oreo cookie for the very first time as a 1-year-old. "Eric? Eric!" someone shouted. The pink haze faded away, and he was snapped back into the conference room, which was quiet. Eric's assistant was gripping his shoulder. "Eric, what happened? All the investors left. They said you were babbling, speaking nonsense. Are you okay?" He looked around the room. Everyone else was gone, except Sonam and Max, who sagged in their chairs at the far end of the table. Sonam was drooling down her chin. Max stared out of the window, mouth wide open. The pink haze had followed them all home. Eric took an Uber to his apartment that night, ordered food on Grubhub, streamed a reality series on Netflix, swiped through 100 shorts on TikTok, told Alexa to play him a heartfelt song on Spotify, matched with 7 people on his dating app, chatted with Claude about rare goldfish, posted on a crypto group on WhatsApp. The next morning, he went to work and ignored all his calls and skipped all his meetings. He started a new Google Sheet, but didn't fill a single cell. At 11 a.m., his assistant told him that neither Max nor Sonam had come into work, and neither was answering emails or texts. Their phones went straight to voicemail. Eric didn't bother to answer her. He just stared at the empty Google Sheet. That was the last time he ever went into the office. Everywhere he went, the pink haze followed. It wasn't as dense as it was in the conference room, more like a thin presence, always there, a sheath over his life, over everything he did and thought. For weeks, he still lived his life, other than work. That was over. When he ate, the pink haze brought him back to the unbelievable solace of feeding from his mother's breast as an infant, while also to the time he choked on a chicken bone in Myrtle Beach. When his phone rang, he heard the nostalgic chime of his parents' landline and the tone of a 911 call when his brother overdosed in high school. The pink haze took away his ability to live in the moment, perhaps the single most important lesson he learned from the podcaster Javier Klim. Every smell recalled the delight of toasted bread and the disgust of a rotting animal. Every face presented the broad smile of a new friend and the offensive snarl of a mortal enemy. For Eric, and he assumed his 2 fellow founders, who completely disappeared, there was no respite from the dramatic, no pause from the heavy. Every moment was an encyclopedia of emotion. The company went under. He stopped paying rent, tossed his phone, and quit bathing. Eric spent his days simply walking the streets, inhaling food if it was in front of him, more of a reflex than a desire. He was barely aware of his surroundings, for everything around him and inside him was swaddled in pink haze. And that's the state I found Eric in that day, crumpled like an old shirt by the pharmacy on Mission Street. After he told me his story in an emotionless drone, he seemed to turn off. He wouldn't answer my questions. Where are you staying? What do you need? Do you have any friends I can call? It was like he used all his human energy just to get the words out. I went inside the pharmacy to get him some water and Advil, but by the time I came out, he was gone. He'd left the branded vest lying on the sidewalk. I stared at the pink cloud logo and wondered if anything he told me was true, or if it was just a drug-fueled lie. I went back to my hotel later that day and pulled out my laptop. I Googled Pink Cloud Startup. The website was down. Sorry, the page you were looking for does not exist. I guess my investment was gone. Oh well. Then I Googled Herald City, California, where Eric, Max, and Sonam got their ayahuasca, or whatever it was. I scrolled down past a dozen ads and clicked on the Wikipedia entry for Herald City. It was apparently a boomtown that hadn't been inhabited in 150 years. After a short gold rush in the 1800s, A chemical spill from the mine ran off every single inhabitant. The boomtown went bust, thoroughly and unconditionally. At least according to Wikipedia, nothing of the town remained. Not a single building, not even a foundation. And certainly not an old lady peddling trinkets to 3 tech founders lost in the desert. Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Sean Revive and produced by Abakar Adan. Editing by Abakar Adan. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman. Coordinating producer is Avery Siegel. And artwork by Jessica Clogston-Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slavin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are Mr. Ballen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levin. Executive producer at Will Media is Will Malnati. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.